Hello and welcome. This is Ariana Meehan, and this is my first Feminist Theology podcast highlighting the biblical story Jephthah's vow and Jephthah's daughter. So first I'm going to be doing a reading of Judges 11:29 to 40. This is Jephthah's vow and Jephthah's daughter. And then we'll just go into break down some points in a feminist perspective, and we'll also highlight some points that Phyllis Tribble said in her book, Texts of Terror. So let's begin. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh. He passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, and he said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whoever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return victorious from the Ammonites, shall be the Lord's, to be offered up by me as a burnt offering." So Jephthah crossed over the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. He inflicted a massive defeat on them from the Aroer to the neighborhood of Mimith, 20 towns, and as far as Abel Keramim. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Now Jephthah's daughter. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and there was his daughter coming out to meet him, with timbrels and with dancing. She was his only child. He had no son or daughter except her. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble to me, for I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." She said to him, "My father, if you have opened your mouth to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has given you vengeance against your enemies, the Ammonites." And she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Grant me 2 months, so that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my companions and I." "Go," he said, and sent her away for 2 months. So she departed, she and her companions, and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. At the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to the vow he had made. She had never slept with a man. So there arose an Israelite custom that for 4 days every year the daughters of Israel would go out to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. So now to those who have not really heard the story before or have trouble translating texts and stories, I'm just going to summarize the story in my own words. So Jephthah the Gileadite was the son of a prostitute, which was kind of thought of as a flaw then. So he was sent away out of his home, but later on the children of Israel who sent him away were seeking someone to lead the fight against the Ammonites, and they wanted Jephthah because he was this mighty warrior. So Jephthah tells God that if he really were to give the Ammonites into his hand, then whatsoever comes forth from the doors of his house and meet him after his victory from the Ammonites shall belong to Yahweh, and he will offer them as a burnt offering. And that ends up being his daughter. So Jephthah only has a daughter, and when he returns home, she is the first one to come out the door and congratulate his victory. Therefore, Jephthah tells her that he made this vow, and now he must follow through with it. And so Jephthah's daughter, she complies, and she tells him that he should follow through with this vow, which is ultimately her death. And she doesn't do much about it, except she asks for 2 months to lament, which also means to grief in the hills with her female friends, whom she references as her companions. And her father permits her to go, and when she returns, he executes her because he vowed to do that. So after taking this feminist theology class, and I'm reading the story, and I'm actually starting to pick up on things that I probably wouldn't have picked up before because I'm viewing it from this feminist lens. The first thing I immediately picked up on was that the blame was being placed completely on the victim which was a woman. So Jephthah says, "You have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble for me." So he's immediately just accusing his own daughter for being the reason he has to follow through with this disgusting promise he had made, and there was nothing she could have done about it. She has so much innocence. She comes running out to him just to congratulate him with love and dancing and these instruments, and he he could have expected it to be anyone else. Like, he only has one child, he says. So unless it was like maybe his wife that isn't spoken about, or an animal of some sort, like a pet, like it's most likely going to be his daughter, whom he claims he loves, but clearly he cares more about his illegitimacy, which stems back to the whole rejection from his Israelite brothers because he was the son of a prostitute, so he was sent away as a castaway. And when he finally agreed to come help and fight, because he was an exceptional fighter and leader, he was really just only thinking about winning because that would give him purpose and make him a hero. Now, Jephthah's daughter, she has very little will to protest. She complies completely and understands that her father made this vow, and she courageously gives herself up to die. And that just really goes to show how little power women have compared to these victorious military men. And this is like a stigma that's been going on for centuries and even showing up currently today, where men need this validation of power at literally any cost. It could be an actual person, a woman. And despite such an awful vow, Jephthah lived on in memories of millions for his military achievements, despite executing his own daughter. Now, this is something we touched upon in class, where in some cases there is abuse or like any sexual assault or anything towards women. They are kind of blamed or feel like this was something they brought upon themselves or was almost unavoidable. And I think that Jephthah feels the same way, where she's like, I can't react poorly to this. I have to follow through with this vow and just kind of accept my fate. And maybe I'll go ask for a couple months to deal with this tragedy and accept everything that I will never get and everything that I have lost. Now I'm going to highlight a few points from Phyllis Treble's Texts of Terror book. The first thing that I thought was most interesting was that she said how God acts as a silent figure in this story. Now, this is very important to note, because it's not like God had asked Jephthah to make this very risky vow. In the heat of being so power hungry, Jephthah made this vow himself. He came up with it on his own. Therefore, it's something he should have foreseen. Like, he should have known that he was giving up his daughter to death, and he wasn't ever asked to do that. Now, what he asked of God did indeed come true. He did rule over the Ammonites, but there's no telling that this was God's doing, that it was because he offered up this burnt sacrifice. And God's silence just goes to show that this all comes from Jephthah's insecurity about his future with the people who had previously rejected him. Okay, now another point that was made was when Jephthah's daughter came to the door. Upon seeing her, Jephthah rent his clothes. And in the Bible, the tearing of clothes is like kind of a means of expressing remorse for having quickening someone's death. But he's not necessarily mourning his daughter. Phyllis Treble says that he's mourning himself. And Phyllis Treble just keeps saying how his daughter is his sacrifice and she just must die for his unfaithfulness, which is so true, because he is the one who made this vow, not her. She didn't inflict this upon herself. No one would want to die. Like, they don't want to bring harm upon themselves. So yeah, Jephthah really is mourning himself. He's trying to portray and express that his daughter is the one who has caused him to do such a horrible thing, and that he shouldn't be blamed for all of this, and it's all his daughter's fault, when she's an innocent figure in this story and has so much more to live for in her life. Now, Phyllis Treble says this one quote that I just wanted to read aloud. She says, "Premature, violent, without an heir, all the marks of unnatural death befall this young woman, and she is not even spared the knowledge of them. Hers is premeditated death, a sentence of murder passed upon an innocent victim because of the faithless vow uttered by her foolish father." So yeah, that is a quote on page 104, and I really think it ties up everything that I've been talking about with power and prestige and men needing validation for themselves over literally any cost, especially the unimportance that women have in their life. Now, lastly, to try to end on a better note, I know that Phyllis Treble says or points out that the daughter of Jephthah is unnamed, but the end of the story says, "For 4 days every year the daughters of Israel would go out to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite." Now, I really understood this as, even though Jephthah the Gileadite was this well-known and supposedly never forgotten military figure that was successful, that doesn't mean that the daughter of Jephthah was lost. There's this tradition that carried on and memory, and the most important part about it is that it was created by women. It was created by the woman who she went in to the hills with for those 2 months, and I think that sentence is really important to not forget, where she asks if she can spend those 2 months to lament her virginity, her and her companions. She wants to be with her female friends in this really hard and dark place in her life, and they're there for her last days of life, where she's really trying to reach out to other women for comfort and power. And since these women knew all the importance of having children and, dying so young, and probably had many experiences with men that were just as awful, they would never have wanted Jephthah's daughter to be forgotten. So even with this awful tragedy imposed on by her selfish father, the women are still there to carry out her remembrance, and that is something I thought of as to be very empowering towards the end of the story. So that's it for this episode of Ariana's Feminist Theology podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed. Subscribe, and there'll be many more biblical interpretations to come.